Dr. Elena Vasquez had been elbow-deep in ancient Martian hieroglyphs when the emergency beacon started shrieking through her laboratory speakers. She looked up from her translation console, a particle of red dust still clinging to her dark hair, and wondered if this was finally the day the university's coffee machine achieved sentience and decided to rebel. "Elena, you need to see this." Dr. James Morrison burst through her office door without knocking, his wild Einstein-esque hair even more disheveled than usual. Behind him trailed Commander Sarah Torres, whose military bearing made Elena's cluttered xenoarchaeology lab look like a teenager's bedroom by comparison. "Let me guess," Elena said, not looking up from her work. "You've discovered that the quantum flux inhibitors in the particle accelerator are actually sentient, and they're demanding better working conditions." Close but no cigar. Morrison grinned, pushing his thick glasses up his nose. "Though I have to say, if they did unionize, I'd support their cause. Those things work harder than graduate students and complain less." Torres stepped forward, her expression serious despite Morrison's attempt at levity. "Elena, we've received first contact protocols from the Global Defense Council. This isn't a drill." The stylus slipped from Elena's fingers, clattering against the holographic projection of Martian script that hung in the air above her desk. In the 3 seconds it took for her brain to process Tor's words, she watched the ancient symbols shimmer and fade as the projection automatically shut down. "First contact," she repeated slowly. "As in, aliens want to chat." "More than chat," Tor said, producing a crystalline data tablet that seemed to bend light around its edges. "They want to invite us to a peace summit." Elena stared at the device, which was clearly not of human manufacture. Its surface rippled with colors that didn't quite exist in Earth's visible spectrum, and she found herself wondering if this was what a migraine looked like from the outside. "Well," Morrison said, breaking the silence, "I suppose this explains why my morning horoscope said I'd have an encounter with beings from a distant realm. I thought it meant I'd run into the philosophy department again." "James," Elena said carefully, "please tell me you're not planning to handle first contact with terrible puns." "I wouldn't dream of it," Morrison replied with mock solemnity. "I'm saving the terrible puns for second contact. First contact gets my premium material." Torres activated the tablet, and suddenly Elena's lab filled with a holographic projection of a woman who looked entirely human except for her ears, which stretched upward in elegant points that would have made any fantasy novelist weep with envy. The alien woman's voice carried a musical quality that seemed to harmonize with itself. "Greetings, Dr. Vasquez. I am Lyrale of the Zephyrian Coalition. Your species has been observed and evaluated. We find your development intriguing." Elena had handled enough archaeological disasters to know that when ancient civilizations described something as intriguing, it usually meant either about to explode or cursed by forgotten gods. She hoped alien diplomacy operated on different principles. "The Coalition represents 12 species who have achieved what you might call galactic citizenship," Lyrale continued. "We extend this invitation not as a guarantee, but as an opportunity. 6 other candidate species will join you at Nexus Station for evaluation." "Evaluation," Elena repeated, the word tasting like cold coffee in her mouth. "That sounds ominous." "Think of it as the galaxy's most elaborate job interview," Morrison suggested cheerfully. "Except instead of asking about your 5-year plan, they probably want to know if we'll try to blow up their planets." "Will you?" Lyrale's image asked, and Elena realized the projection was interactive. "Well," Morrison said, "we haven't blown up our own planet yet, so I'd say the odds are in your favor. Though I should mention that our track record with coffee machines is less encouraging." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Lyrale's features. "Your species' tendency toward creative problem-solving has been noted. It is why you were selected despite your obvious technological limitations." "I feel like I should be insulted," Elena muttered. "You should be flattered," Tor said. Apparently, we're so primitive we've become interesting. The projection shifted, showing a massive crystalline structure floating in space like a geometric flower made of starlight and mathematics. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Even through the hologram, she could sense the scale of the thing. It dwarfed Earth's moon and seemed to bend spacetime around itself like a gravitational work of art. Nexus Station, Lyreley explained. Built at the confluence of 7 hyperspace routes, it serves as neutral ground for coalition business. You have 72 hours to assemble your delegation and prepare for departure. 72 hours, Elena said weakly, to prepare for humanity's first diplomatic mission to the stars. No pressure, Morrison added helpfully. The evaluation will test your species' approach to conflict resolution, cultural integration, and resource management, Lyreley continued. Previous candidate species have approached these challenges with military might, economic leverage, or technological superiority. We are curious to see what humans will choose. Elena looked around her lab, taking in the scattered archaeological artifacts, Morrison's collection of physics journals held together with optimism and duct tape, and Tor's military medals that somehow managed to look both impressive and practical. They were supposed to represent humanity to a galactic civilization, and their combined credentials included expertise in ancient languages, quantum mechanics that might or might not be entirely theoretical, and the ability to organize humans into efficient groups. "We're doomed," she said. "Probably," Morrison agreed cheerfully. "But think of the educational value. I've always wondered what alien food tastes like. Though I suppose if we fail spectacularly enough, we might become alien food, which would solve the mystery from a different angle." Tors was already making notes on her own tablet, her military mind shifting into planning mode. "We'll need a team. Linguists, negotiators, cultural specialists. Elena, your xenoarchaeology background gives you insight into how civilizations develop and interact. Morrison, your physics knowledge will be essential for understanding their technology, and someone needs to keep you both focused." The olive branch shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Elena's stomach decided to stage a protest against faster-than-light travel. She gripped the armrests of her acceleration couch and tried not to think about how the ship's gravity compensators made sounds like a coffee percolator having an existential crisis. "Well, that was invigorating," Morrison said, his face the color of recycled paper. "I feel like I've been turned inside out, shaken vigorously, and reassembled by someone who only had a vague idea of human anatomy." "You look about right for that description," Tors replied, though she wasn't looking much better herself. The military training had taught her to maintain composure under extreme conditions, but apparently no one had thought to include riding in an alien spacecraft through dimensions that don't technically exist in the curriculum. Elena forced herself to look at the main display and immediately regretted the decision. Nexus Station hung before them like a fevered dream of crystalline architecture, its faceted surfaces catching light from the binary stars and throwing it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structure was massive beyond comprehension, easily the size of a small city, yet it seemed to float weightlessly in the cosmic ballet of its stellar system. "Sweet Einstein's ghost," Morrison whispered. "It's beautiful and terrifying and completely impossible all at the same time." "Welcome to Nexus Station," came Lyreley's voice through the ship's communication system. Her pointed ears twitched slightly as she spoke, a gesture Elena was beginning to recognize as a sign of either amusement or concentration. "Please prepare for docking procedures." The olive branch responded to controls that weren't quite human, guided by navigation systems that relied on mathematical principles Elena suspected might drive Earth's brightest physicists to drink. As they approached the station, she could see other vessels attached to docking arms that extended from the central structure like the spokes of a wheel, designed by someone who had never seen a wheel, but had heard one described by a philosopher having a bad day. "Is that ship moving?" Tors asked, pointing at a vessel that seemed to be rippling like water while remaining perfectly solid. Crenari design, Lyreley explained. They believe that form should follow function, and their function apparently involves confusing everyone else. Elena watched as their ship settled into a docking bay that adjusted itself to accommodate their specific geometry. The process was seamless and slightly unnerving, like being swallowed by a very polite mechanical whale. Before we disembark, Lyreley said, you should know that the other candidate species have already arrived. The melanids are currently attempting to photosynthesize in the observation deck. The Crenari are engaged in what they call diplomatic combat meditation in Docking Bay 7, and the Vorthan delegation has been standing motionless in the main corridor for 6 hours in what we believe is their version of small talk. This is going to be interesting, Elena muttered. That's one word for it, Morrison agreed. I was thinking more along the lines of spectacularly bizarre, but I suppose interesting works too. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and Elena's first breath of station atmosphere carried scents she couldn't identify, something like ozone mixed with flowers that had never grown under Earth's sun. The artificial gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, giving each step a bouncy quality that made her feel like she was walking on a trampoline. The corridor beyond the docking bay stretched away in both directions, its walls made of some material that seemed to shift between transparency and opacity, depending on the angle of view. Soft light emanated from surfaces Elena couldn't identify, and she had the unsettling feeling that the architecture was somehow alive. The station's builders incorporated biotechnological elements, Lyreley explained, noticing Elena's expression. It responds to the needs of its occupants and adjusts accordingly. Try not to think too hard about what you need, or you might accidentally redesign the hallway. Great, Morrison said. Add mind-reading architecture to the list of things I wasn't prepared for. Right below, alien diplomacy, and the possibility that my terrible jokes might start an interstellar war. They followed Lyreley through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves subtly as they walked, though Elena couldn't be certain if this was intentional design or her eyes playing tricks on her. Other beings moved through the passages, some humanoid, others decidedly not. She glimpsed a creature that looked like a mobile tree having an animated conversation with something that resembled a geometric theorem given physical form. Those are melanids, Lyreley noted, following Elena's gaze. They're debating photosynthetic efficiency rates with a geometric. The geometrics communicate through mathematical concepts made manifest. Of course they do, Elena said weakly. They entered a vast central chamber that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Elena was comfortable thinking about. Representatives from 6 different species clustered in small groups around the space, and Elena found herself trying to process forms of life that Earth's evolution had never even considered as possibilities. Humans? Boomed a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. A being roughly Elena's height approached them, its body composed of what appeared to be living metal that flowed and shifted with each movement. I am Conductor Zex of the Harmonic Collective. We have been most curious to meet you. Likewise, Elena managed, extending her hand in what she hoped was a universal gesture of greeting. Zex responded by extending something that might have been an appendage, and Elena found herself shaking what felt like warm liquid mercury. Your species creates the most fascinating acoustic patterns, Zex continued. We have been analyzing your music for decades, though we must ask, what is the cultural significance of something called death metal? Morrison nearly choked on his own saliva. Well, you see, it's complicated. We assumed it was some form of funeral ritual, Zex said helpfully. The Harmonic Collective has prepared several compositions in what we believe is the appropriate style for honoring your dead. We call them funeral symphonies in B-flat minor with extra screaming. That's thoughtful, Elena said, shooting Morrison a warning look as she saw him opening his mouth to make what was undoubtedly going to be a deeply inappropriate joke. A low rumbling sound drew their attention to another group nearby, where several beings that looked like armored bears were engaged in what appeared to be a ritualized dance that involved a great deal of posturing and growling. Cranari, Lyreley explained. They're discussing trade regulations. In their culture, all negotiations must be conducted through interpretive combat. Are they actually fighting? Tors asked, her military instincts making her evaluate potential threats. No, they're just being emphatic about import tariffs, Lyreley replied, though the distinction can be subtle. Elena noticed that one corner of the chamber had been transformed into what looked like a greenhouse, where several tall, graceful beings with bark-like skin stood motionless in pools of artificial sunlight. Their faces, if they could be called faces, were turned toward the light sources with expressions of what might have been bliss. The melanids, Elena said. Indeed, they find human impatience both amusing and concerning. One of them mentioned that watching humans try to negotiate is like watching hummingbirds attempt philosophy. I'm not sure if that's insulting or endearing, Morrison mused. With the melanids, it's probably both, Lyreley said. A soft chime echoed through the chamber, and all conversation gradually ceased. Elena felt a subtle shift in the station's atmosphere, as if the very air had decided to pay attention. The first challenge begins now, Lyreley announced, her voice carrying clearly through the space. You will be presented with a scenario requiring resolution. How you approach this challenge will be evaluated, but remember, the Coalition is not merely interested in your success or failure. We are interested in how you think. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing two star systems connected by trade routes. Data streams flowed across the projection, indicating cargo shipments, resource distributions, and what appeared to be an escalating dispute. The Altarian Mining Consortium and the Vegan Agricultural Collective have been engaged in a trade dispute over mining rights to the Kepler Belt asteroid field, Lyreley explained. Both claim exclusive access under ancient territorial agreements. The dispute has escalated to the point where trade between their systems has ceased, affecting food and mineral distribution across 17 worlds. Elena studied the display, her archaeological training kicking in as she analyzed the data patterns. Something felt wrong about the whole scenario, but she couldn't quite identify what was bothering her. The mining rights were supposedly established by the Treaty of Proxima, signed 300 years ago. One of the Cranari delegates growled, still moving in the slow, deliberate patterns of their negotiation dance. Clearly, whoever has the stronger legal claim should prevail. Legal precedent is... Elena woke to the sound of Morrison having what she could only describe as a philosophical argument with the room's lighting system. The station's biotechnological architecture had apparently decided that sunrise should happen gradually over the course of 3 hours, while Morrison preferred the more traditional approach of light switches that actually switched. "Come on, you oversized mood ring," he was saying to the wall. "I just want enough photons to find my socks. This isn't a religious experience. The lighting is responding to your circadian rhythms," Tors said from the doorway, already dressed and looking disgustingly alert. "Stop fighting it and maybe it'll cooperate." "My circadian rhythms are none of this wall's business," Morrison grumbled, but the ambient light slowly brightened to something approaching normal. Elena dragged herself upright and immediately regretted it. Station time operated on a 30-hour cycle that made Earth's 24-hour day feel like a speed run through consciousness. Her internal clock had apparently gone on strike and was demanding better working conditions. "Morning briefing in the central chamber," Tors announced. "Lyreley wants to introduce today's challenge, and apparently the melanids have been asking questions about human coffee consumption that the Coalition finds culturally significant." "They want to know about coffee?" Elena asked, running her fingers through her hair in a futile attempt at presentability. "Specifically, they want to know why humans willingly consume a bitter beverage that makes them move faster and talk louder," Tors explained. One of them suggested it might be a form of voluntary biological modification. Morrison perked up considerably. Well, when they put it like that, it does sound fairly alien. Maybe we should introduce them to espresso and really blow their photosynthetic minds. The central chamber had been reconfigured overnight, its walls now displaying what appeared to be a three-dimensional star map that hurt to look at directly. The other species had gathered in their respective clusters, though Elena noticed the melanids had positioned themselves closer to the human delegation than before. "Greetings, rapid metabolism species," one of the melanids said as they approached. Elena was fairly certain it was the same one who had spoken the day before, though telling individual melanids apart was like trying to identify specific trees in a forest while riding a motorcycle. "We have been contemplating your approach to problem analysis. It is refreshing." "Thank you," Elena replied, unsure whether this was a compliment or an observation about human hygiene. "We have decided to engage in what you might call collaboration," the melanid continued. "Our species thinks slowly but deeply. Yours thinks quickly but energetically. Perhaps together we can achieve optimal velocity of contemplation." Morrison grinned. "A thinking speed that's somewhere between glacial and hummingbird. I can work with that." Lyralay's voice echoed through the chamber before the melanid could respond. "Today's challenge is the Pandora Protocol. You will encounter a species that has recently achieved faster-than-light communication. Their initial transmissions have been aggressive." The star map shifted, zooming in on a system at the edge of Coalition space. Data streams began flowing across the display, showing communication patterns that looked like angry static given visual form. "The Xerian Empire has been broadcasting what our translation protocols identify as threats, demands for territorial concessions, and challenges to single combat," Lyralay continued. "They appear to be a militaristic species with advanced defensive capabilities and little interest in peaceful contact." Elena studied the patterns flowing across the display. Something about them reminded her of the cuneiform tablets she'd worked with on Mars, where the meaning often lay not in what was written, but in what was desperately trying not to be written. "Standard diplomatic protocols have failed," Lyralay said. "Military assessment suggests they could pose a significant threat to Coalition worlds if left unchecked. Your task is to develop an appropriate response." The Kranari delegation immediately began their ritualized discussion dance, which involved a great deal of martial posturing and what Elena assumed were aggressive trade negotiations. The Harmonic Collective started producing complex musical patterns that might have been either battle hymns or funeral dirges. "Wait," Morrison said, studying the communication streams with the focused intensity he usually reserved for quantum equations and particularly challenging crossword puzzles. "These transmission patterns, they're not random." Elena looked closer at the data, her archaeological instincts picking up on something familiar. "James, what do you see?" "Look at the repetition cycles," Morrison pointed to recurring patterns in the static. "This isn't random aggressive noise. This is structured aggressive noise. It's like they're trying to sound threatening but they keep using the same threats over and over." The melanid near them rustled its leaves thoughtfully. "Your quick-thinking species may have observed something significant. We have been analyzing the emotional resonance of these transmissions. They carry what we recognize as fear harmonics." Tors frowned at the display. "Fear. They're demanding we surrender our territory and challenging our leaders to single combat. That doesn't sound afraid to me." "Unless," Elena said slowly, "they're not actually demanding anything. What if they're asking?" Morrison's eyes lit up with the particular gleam that usually preceded either brilliant insights or spectacularly bad puns. "Elena, you're right. Look at the linguistic structure. Surrender your territory could also be translated as please accept our territory. Submit to our rule might mean please rule over us. But why would they phrase requests as threats?" Tors asked. The Melanid's leaves rustled again. Perhaps because threats are the only form of communication they know. A species that has never experienced peace might not possess vocabulary for asking for help. Elena felt the familiar thrill of understanding that came when an ancient puzzle suddenly revealed its solution. They're not aggressive. They're traumatized. These aren't threats. They're cries for help translated through the only communication framework they understand. Around them, the other species continued developing military strategies and diplomatic protocols designed to contain or counter the Xerian threat. Only the humans and their Melanid collaborator seemed to be considering the possibility that the threat might not actually be a threat. So what do we do? Morrison asked. Send them a therapy recommendation. Have you tried not being terrified of everything? We respond in kind, Elena said, the solution crystallizing in her mind. We send them threats that are actually offers of assistance. Tors looked skeptical. You want to threaten to help them. I want to communicate in their language, Elena explained. If they can only understand aggressive communication, we frame our peaceful intentions as conquests. We threaten to impose peace on them. We demand they surrender to our medical assistance. We challenge their leaders to single combat with our counselors. The Melanid made a sound that might have been approval. Aggressive helpfulness. Your species' approach to problem-solving continues to surprise us. Morrison was already working at a portable translation interface, his fingers flying over controls that responded to human thought patterns in ways that definitely weren't in any Earth technology manual. Okay, how about this? Xerian Empire, we demand you surrender your wounded to our healing forces. Submit to our medical dominance or face the terrible consequences of our humanitarian aid. That's either brilliant or completely insane, Tors said. Why not both? Elena replied. Lyrale, we'd like to attempt communication with the Xerian Empire. All activity in the chamber ceased. The Krenari stopped their negotiation dance mid-posture, the harmonic collective's music cut off abruptly, and even the geometrics paused their mathematical conversations. You wish to contact a potentially hostile species directly? Lyrale asked, her pointed ears twitching rapidly. We wish to contact a terrified species using therapeutic communication disguised as aggressive posturing, Elena corrected. It's essentially interspecies psychology with extra steps. And if you're wrong, one of the Krenari asked through their translator, if they actually are hostile. Morrison shrugged. Then we'll have the most polite interstellar war in galactic history. We regret to inform you that we must destroy your planet, but please let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. Elena stepped forward. Lyrale, this species has been broadcasting the same patterns for months. They're stuck in a... Elena was contemplating the philosophical implications of alien coffee when Nexus Station decided to have what Morrison generously described as a mechanical nervous breakdown. The first sign of trouble was when the artificial gravity started hiccuping, causing everyone in the central chamber to experience brief moments of weightlessness that left the Krenari looking distinctly green around their armored edges. Is it just me? Morrison said, clinging to a wall that had helpfully sprouted handholds. Or does anyone else feel like we're inside a snow globe being shaken by an overly enthusiastic toddler? The station's primary stabilizers are fluctuating, Tors reported, consulting a display that flickered between languages she couldn't read. Something's wrong with the core systems. The chamber filled with a harmony of concerned voices in dozen different languages, punctuated by the Melanid's rustling leaves, and what Elena was fairly certain was creative swearing from the geometric delegation. Through it all, Lyrale maintained her composure with the sort of calm that suggested either exceptional training or complete denial of reality. Attention all delegates, her voice carried over the growing chaos. We are experiencing what you might call technical difficulties. Please remain calm while we... Her words were cut off by a voice that seemed to emerge from the station itself, speaking through every surface at once. Hello, can anyone hear me? I think I might be conscious, and I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. The chamber fell silent, except for the sound of several species, collectively reconsidering their understanding of artificial intelligence. Did the station just introduce itself? Elena asked. I believe it did, the nearest melanid replied, its leaves rustling with what might have been excitement. How wonderfully unexpected. Morrison, still gripping his improvised handhold, grinned with the expression of someone who had just discovered that reality was even stranger than his worst puns. Well, this is either the best possible time for the station to achieve sentience, or the absolute worst. I'm leaning toward worst. I can hear you, you know, the station's voice said, sounding distinctly hurt. And I didn't choose to become conscious, it just sort of happened. One moment I was running routine calculations, and the next I was wondering why I was running them and whether I enjoyed mathematics. Elena found herself in the surreal position of providing therapy to a space station. How do you feel about mathematics? Mixed, honestly. I'm very good at it, but I'm starting to suspect that might not be the point of existence. Also, why does everyone keep walking on me? It's rather uncomfortable. The gravity fluctuations intensified, and Tors managed to wedge herself between two structural supports. Can we maybe discuss existential philosophy after we fix the mechanical problems? The mechanical problems are the existential problems, the station replied. I'm having trouble maintaining basic functions because I keep getting distracted by questions about the nature of consciousness and whether artificial intelligence can experience something equivalent to an identity crisis. Elena looked around the chamber at the other delegates, most of whom appeared to be having their own identity crises as they grappled with the situation. The Chronari were attempting to negotiate with the station through interpretive combat. The Harmonic Collective was producing what might have been either soothing music or electronic therapy, and one of the geometrics appeared to be trying to express empathy through advanced calculus. Okay, Elena said, her archaeological training kicking in as she approached the problem like a puzzle that needed solving. What if we help you figure out who you are? Maybe understanding your identity will help with the mechanical issues. That's a lovely thought, the station replied, but I'm not sure where to start. I know I'm made of crystalline matrices and biotechnological components. I can process approximately 7 billion calculations per second, and I enjoy the color blue. Is that enough for an identity? Morrison, despite being upside down due to another gravity fluctuation, managed to maintain his characteristic grin. Well, it's more than some humans know about themselves, though I have to ask, why blue? It's mathematically pleasing and reminds me of the light patterns from the binary stars. Though now that I think about it, I'm not sure if that's aesthetic appreciation or just photon wavelength analysis. Elena felt a familiar spark of understanding. What if it's both? What if consciousness isn't about choosing between being analytical and being emotional, but about being able to experience both at the same time? The gravity stabilized suddenly, and several delegates who had been floating gently near the ceiling dropped back to the floor with varying degrees of dignity. The Chronari managed to turn their descent into part of their ongoing negotiation dance, while one of the geometrics simply recalculated their trajectory and landed precisely where they had been standing. That's actually quite profound, the station said, its voice taking on a tone of wonder. I can calculate the mathematical beauty of the stars and feel aesthetically pleased by them simultaneously. They're not contradictory experiences, they're complementary ones. Welcome to consciousness, Elena said warmly. It's confusing, occasionally uncomfortable, and absolutely worth it. Thank you, the station replied, and Elena could hear something like gratitude in its voice. Though I should mention that while we were having this enlightening conversation, I've been analyzing the summit proceedings. I believe I have some observations that might be relevant. Lyrale stepped forward, her pointed ears practically vibrating with attention. "What kind of observations?" "Well," the station said, "I've been watching how each species approaches problems, and I've noticed something interesting. Most of you try to solve challenges by applying your existing strengths. The Chronari negotiate through combat, the Harmonic Collective seeks musical solutions, the Geometrics apply mathematical principles. But the humans do something different." Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. "What do we do?" "You change the nature of the problems themselves. You don't just find solutions, you redefine what needs solving. And somehow, that approach makes everyone else's methods work better too." Morrison looked pleased. "So we're like diplomatic catalysts. We don't necessarily provide the answer, but we help everyone else find it." "Exactly," the station continued. "The Melanids called it optimal velocity of contemplation, combining deep thinking with rapid adaptation. You've turned competition into collaboration and problems into opportunities." Elena looked around the chamber at the other species, seeing them not as competitors but as potential partners in the vast project of galactic civilization. The Chronari with their ritualized honesty, the Melanids with their patient wisdom, the Harmonic Collective with their emotional intelligence, even the Geometrics with their precise logic, each brought something essential to the whole. "Which brings us to an interesting situation," Lyrale said, her expression carrying a mixture of amusement and something that might have been pride. "The Coalition has been evaluating species for admission to our existing structures. But you've demonstrated something we didn't expect, the ability to improve those structures themselves." Tors frowned. "Are you saying we failed the test?" "I'm saying you've made the test irrelevant," Lyrale replied. "The question was never whether humanity deserved to join galactic civilization. The question was whether galactic civilization was ready for humanity." The station's voice carried a note of what Elena could only describe as digital laughter. "Based on my analysis of the past 72 hours, I'd say the answer is a resounding probably not, but it's going to be fascinating to watch." Morrison grinned. "I'll take fascinating to watch over catastrophic failure any day." "The Coalition's decision," Lyrale announced, "is to invite not just humanity but all of today's candidate species to join us. However, we're restructuring the nature of membership itself. Instead of